Hello. That is the Rooftop Revolutionaries.
Just Rooftop Revolutionaries.
Sorry, I added the doll as like a stylistic thing. I was like, that is the Buddy Hollies. Anyway, Rooftop Revolutionaries. Y'all should check them out. I think the lead singer is amazing.
You're biased.
But this is welcome to Common Sense. This is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other shit.
And if you can't tell, we're going to be a little loopy on this episode. Weirdly, this is the night we have not had any alcohol.
And
we
that's
just
the problem.
got back from a long trip. We went and...
It wasn't really a long trip.
Okay, if you're going to negate everything I say. I meant long as in more than a day. We went up to New York City. It was very interesting, being traveling during the pandemic. I'm sure many of you have your own interesting stories.
So nice, though.
Actually, I was going to tell the story later. I'm going to tell it. I'm going to tell it now. But just to let you know, in this episode, we're going to get into how the exit polls in these primaries are way off from the machine results, which you might remember happened in 2016. Anyway, I have a lot of details about that. We're going to get into that in a minute. We're going to get into more details about coronavirus and what's going on in this country as the shit goes down, as the shit hits the fan, and then everyone covers their faces because they don't want to get the shit on their face because the shit probably has corona on it, and you know how it goes. So I was performing. My book just came out. The book release event was at Strand Books in New York City, really cool independent bookstore, and had an event there, about 100 people audience, and a couple of people had masks on, not that unusual. As we've been walking around New York City, you see people with masks on, not that crazy. But as my opening joke, I thought it would be funny to go, hey, thanks for having me. If anybody has coronavirus, please leave. Now, it got a big laugh, and then this guy, wearing a mask, instantly raises his hand, gets up and leaves. And as he's walking out, everyone laughs, and I go, oh, no, you didn't really need to leave, and I, say a couple of jokes on that. And then he kept going, and he never came back.
Mm-hmm.
Never the once came back.
Yeah.
Which was very odd, and to this moment, I am trying to process what exactly went down. Because if he had coronavirus, why'd go out? And if he had coronavirus and didn't go out, why decided to leave at that moment? And none of it makes any sense. I think the only thing that makes it, I can even begin to try and think could be it, is that he had the mask on because he was terrified of coronavirus. He's totally just given in to the pandemonium and the chaos, and he's afraid. But he was like, I'm going to go out anyway. I can do this. And then he got out there, and I said that one joke, and he was like, no, I can't. And he left.
Just kidding. Just
hope too much. Because I have no idea. But anyway, if you're out there, if you're listening, sir, could you please shoot me an email because I have been racking my brains and I don't know what you were thinking.
And it was really a joke. And if you're going to see a comedian, you should be ready for some jokes.
However, I got to say that if that was his joke and he was just so committed to it, because he got a big laugh when he got up to leave because they thought he was joking, which apparently he wasn't. If you are going to do a joke like that, the commitment to that joke for that guy was really impressive. He literally went home just to sell the joke, which was awesome. But we're going to get moving into a lot of things, but mainly we're going to start off with the exit polls. Now, I just put out I know we talked about how the elections are rigged in various ways last week, but we didn't get into the exit polls because they're hard to get. They're hard to find out. There's only one remaining, you probably heard me mention this before, there's only one remaining exit poll company in America called Edison Research that does all the exit polls. And except Fox News, I think, claims they have their own thing going or whatever, but who the fuck would ever trust exit polls from Fox News?
Seriously.
But here's the thing, and we're going to get into actual numbers from specific states here in a second. Edison Research says outwardly, they said in 2016, their CEO, something Linsky, said to the Washington Post that they take their exit polls, and use the machine results to then basically ruin the exit polls.
To adjust the exit polls.
They quote-unquote adjust them we see the machine results are showing that in this area a lot of Hispanic people voted and this people voted. So we're going to alter our exit polls, which is the opposite of the way exit polls work. Exit polls are supposed to serve as a check on the unaccountable machines. Anyway, there is a moment where you can actually see the exit polls before they've been adjusted, before they've been changed, before they've been doctored. And that is when they release the exit polls immediately after, as the polls close, CNN will release those exit polls, but they don't really talk about them on TV. They'll talk about other exit polls. They'll say this many people care about healthcare and shit like that. But they won't talk about the flat out how many people voted, things like that. So, TDMS Research is the website that has gone to the trouble to get these documents when CNN released them and then actually do the math to figure out percentages and figure out what changed from the exit polls to the machine results. And you can go online and look at the site yourself, tdmsresearch.com, I believe. And so they've done the work. And here are the results. And I'm going to go through a few states. So some of the states, shockingly, showed a very large difference between what the exit polls predict is happening in these elections and what happened in the machine results, the unaccountable black box machines that we can't check and we can't see the code. So to begin with, South Carolina. Now, as we remember going into South Carolina, Joe Biden was doing very well, but he wasn't necessarily gonna run away with it. No. He was doing well. Polling shows he was doing well. But in South Carolina, Biden's vote count exhibited the largest disparity from his exit poll projection. His unverified computer-generated vote totals represented an 8.3% increase than his projected exit poll share. Now, given that there were 528,776 voters in the election in South Carolina, he gained approximately 19,700 more votes than projected by the exit poll. Now, what did this do if he was going to win it anyway? Well, they needed him to have a landslide. They needed him to do incredibly well in South Carolina in order to justify this, Joe-mentum, right? Oh, my God. Joe Biden, you were really excited when that was happening, right? Joe Biden is taking over. And so he just crushed it in South Carolina. But it gets even worse because, as you recall, Super Tuesday, and we talked some about this last week, Joe Biden, won a ton of contests when he was hardly supposed to win any. He even won Massachusetts, where he was polling.
He had no office. He did no ground game. He didn't even show up there to give speeches. It's basically like he was like a ghost candidate, and somehow he won.
He literally never made an appearance there.
Right.
And this is a senile, doddering old man who has sexual harassment claims littered across the country. He has a record that is horrific, a racist record, pushing the crime bills that have locked up millions of people in this country, helped double the prison population in this country, making us the largest prison state in the world. Largely black and brown people are locked up, and especially largely poor people. So it is a class war in a lot of ways. That's him. He helped push Clinton to sign that stuff. He supported the Iraq War in a big way, ran around loving the Iraq War. Let's kill 1 million people in Iraq for weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. Anyway, Massachusetts, Bernie was supposed to win, according to polling. The question was whether he or Elizabeth Warren were going to win, right? Because it's Warren's home state. And that was a big question. Could Warren pull it out or not? Well, here's from TDMS Research. Sanders won Massachusetts in the exit poll and lost it in the unaccountable computer count. The discrepancies between the exit poll and the vote count for Sanders and Biden totaled 8.4%, double the 4% margin of error. Votes came from Sanders and Warren and were shifted to a combination of Biden and Bloomberg, the two establishment candidates. Biden gained approximately 65,000 more votes than projected by his exit polls. And here's something else that's interesting, is you got to figure that, okay, well, maybe there's something wrong with the exit polls, but maybe this is just all elections in Massachusetts. They all go this way, right? That the exit polls are just very far off for what. But in fact, in 2016, remember you had a similar exit poll shift of 8% between Clinton and Sanders. The votes came from Sanders, went to Clinton. In 2016, however, the Massachusetts Republican Party exit poll, taken at the same time and at the same precincts as the Democratic Party primary. And you remember, there was 5 candidates in the Republican primaries back then, 2016. And those matched the computer count almost precisely, but varying by less than 1%, meaning the exit polls were correct for the Republicans. What does that tell you? That tells you that there's some computer fuckery going on. Like, it's ridiculous that this shift would happen just on the Democratic side.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not to say, again, folks listening to this thinking, well, the Republicans are assholes. Yes. This is not to say that the Republicans don't engage in a shit ton of fuckery like interstate crosscheck and incredibly racist voter suppression, which the Democrats do too. This is to say that the Democrats are the ones who try to sneakily steal the primary from a progressive candidate. So when Trump was running for office or running in the primaries in 2016, did the Republicans love it? No, but without the superdelegates and without engaging in this same level of primary election rigging, Trump was able to win that nomination. And the Democrats are pulling out all of these stops to ensure that Bernie Sanders does not win the nomination that is so clearly his. So this is just a very powerful example of the lengths that the Democrats are going to in order to stop Bernie Sanders from winning the primary.
I mean, if you just look at the number of people that attend Bernie Sanders events compared to the number of people that attend a Biden event.
Well, and I just wanted to real quick, I know I'm kind of like veering us off the point here about the exit polls, but a friend of mine posted this, and this is something that that has really bugged me since a while back. But in 2016, I came up with the phrase "fact fear" with regards to Clinton voters who just wanted to vote for Clinton, but they didn't want to know where she stood on any of the issues. They sure as shit didn't want to know any of her history. They just wanted to vote for the vagina, and that, like, leave them alone. That's all that they want to do. And here, there's, Warren has dropped out. By the way, Tulsi Gabbard's still in the race, but shh, don't tell anyone.
Oh my God, the mainstream media just keeps going. They keep going, well, there's no more women in the race. Yeah, there's no more people of color. We're down to 2 white men. And you're like, there's both a woman and a person of color still in the race.
But that aside, there is a friend of mine posted this comparison of Biden versus Sanders in terms of their past. Lee, you mentioned the Iraq War authorization. Sanders opposed. Biden supported. 1996 Defense of Marriage Act. Sanders opposed. Biden supported. That was basically saying that marriage is between a man and a woman. Patriot Act 2001, Sanders opposed, Biden supported. The Patriot Act reauthorization of 2006, Sanders opposed, Biden supported.
And the Patriot Act, of course, has allowed this unlimited surveillance of American citizens that's been so repulsive.
The Wall Street bailout, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. The Bankruptcy Act of 2005, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. The TPP, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. And lest we forget, Obama was the one who was pushing that so hard. Dude actually showed up in Congress, which presidents don't do. He actually showed up in Congress on a day before they were going to vote for fast track for the TPP, just to walk around and like schmooze with people to try and desperately push this fucking nightmare of a deal through, which didn't end up happening.
And in case you're having a little memory fart, TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, largest corporate power grab perhaps ever created, involved multiple nations, gave away the sovereignty of countries to corporate lawyers and lobbyists. Truly a repulsive trade deal, and Obama was pushing it, Biden was pushing it, and yeah, the only reason that we ended up knowing partially what was in it was from WikiLeaks.
The NAFTA, another, NAFTA 2.0 is still in the works right now. Well, they've already worked it out, but it hasn't been finalized as of yet, as I understand it. But the original NAFTA, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. And again, NAFTA has been an absolute disaster for all working folks in Mexico, Canada, and of course in the United States, NAFTA being the North American Free Trade Agreement. And, it created a huge swath of campesinos and campesinas in Mexico that were then completely devastated, that then went north to find other opportunities. Meanwhile, here, particularly in places like the Rust Belt, that slogan of American Made was beat further to death. That dead horse was beaten even more. In Canada, same situation.
But
so that's the fallout from NAFTA.
It was great for the tops of corporations, CEOs doing great.
The repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. The border fence legislation in 2006, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden. Again, let's keep in mind that the border fence legislation of 2006 was Obama in between 2008 and 2015 basically ensured that the border became even more militarized. The war on drugs, opposed by Sanders, supported by Biden, and marijuana legalization, opposed by Biden and supported by Sanders. And this is just like a little snippet of examples. And this is not to say, oh my God, Sanders is perfect, but just look at the history of Biden's choices that he's made on behalf of Wall Street, on behalf of the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex. These are the people that he makes decisions for.
His top contributors are like credit card companies and banks.
Right. And wasn't it Big Pharma, too? Like, that's one of his main contributors.
So you can see why these states need to be rigged, why this primary is being rigged in order to stop Sanders and allow Biden to continue to make these horrible decisions for the American people, but great for the ultra-wealthy. Let's get to a few more states. I have, basically 2-3 more. Texas, as you recall, in Texas, it was looking like Sanders might win there, which would have been a huge upset. Biden, basically, they pulled even in the polling, Biden and Sanders. So that's not exit polls, that's pre-polling. And yet, according to the exit polls, Sanders was tied with Biden, but lost in the unobservable computer counts by 4.5%. This is, again, TDMS research. There's a good reason to believe that the exit poll just prior to publishing showed a Sanders win in Texas. So there's good reason to believe that Sanders actually did win Texas. On top of that, there's been news recently that 44 thumb drives full of votes, because that's how these votes are taken from the machine results and then tabulated. 44 thumb drives were found the other day in Dallas County that were never counted. They came forward and said, hey, we found these thumb drives. They weren't ever counted. That is 10% of the complete vote was never counted.
Also, what with the thumb drives? Why is shit on thumb drives?
Because that's what happens when you have completely black box, unaccountable computers. You just fucking transfer the stuff around. And actually, an election judge, last time around in 2016, came forward, kind of a whistleblower, came forward and said that, yes, in his area, they were not connected to the internet, so they couldn't be hacked through the internet. But he goes, we were given memory cards and we were just supposed to take them to be tabulated. He's like, if you wanted to dispose of some of these, cheat and put in your own or whatever, he's like, we had complete ability to do that.
Yeah, and it just speaks to you have votes that are supposed to be handled with the care afforded to the concept of democracy. You have them on a thumb drive that could just, it could be easily switched out
a magnet.
With a different one.
Can't you just take a magnet to a thumb drive, or is that something else?
I think that's like VHS tapes.
Okay. And credit cards.
But on fucking thumb drives, I don't even feel comfortable putting important video files on thumb drives, because I'm like, I'm gonna fucking sit on this, or it's gonna get lost in between the cushions on the couch. I'll never see it again. But so these are fucking votes.
You're saying all my homemade porn should not be on that thumb drive?
It depends on how many people you want to see it. So,
and on top of that, something we mentioned last week. Hundreds of polling places were closed in minority areas which were voting for Sanders in order to basically stop them from voting, complete voter suppression. The Guardian reported on this. That's a mainstream outlet. So this is not some fringe idea that the DNC, the Democratic establishment in various states, is setting, has been setting it up to make sure this thing can be stolen from Sanders. Let's move on. I don't want to go through these states forever. So let's move on to Vermont. Election now Vermont. Bernie Sanders was expected to win easily. He did win easily, so I think that makes it so people will just look away and not look into it. But election results from this is TDMS research. Election results from the computerized vote counts differed significantly from the results projected by the exit poll conducted by Edison Research. It's then published by CNN at the poll's closing. In candidate Sanders' home state, the combined disparities between exit poll and the vote count for candidates Sanders and Biden, so if you combine the change between both of them, which would be the total change that occurs, you get 10.8%. That exhibited the largest disparity of all 14 primary states that voted to date and for which there was exit polls conducted. The combined disparities between the exit poll and the vote count, the computer vote count, for candidates Sanders and Biden at 10.8% was double the margin of error. Now, what this did, other than just make it a little bit closer in Vermont, was it allowed Biden to get above that 15% threshold, because if he'd been below that, he would have had 0 delegates out of Vermont. Instead, he got several delegates out of Vermont. So that was important to him. New Hampshire, of all presidential candidates, Buttigieg's vote count exhibited the largest disparity. You'll recall Buttigieg, quote-unquote, won Iowa. He didn't really, but they claimed he did for several days. And then Bernie Sanders was supposed to win New Hampshire easily, but then he only won by a few percentage points over Buttigieg. Isn't that interesting? So it turns out Buttigieg's vote count exhibited the largest disparity from his exit poll projection. His unverified, unaccountable, computer-generated vote totals represented a 12% increase of his projected exit poll share. So kept it a lot closer in New Hampshire, which, again, a lot of this has to do with the media storyline. If you can say, if Bernie Sanders wins Iowa, now they fucked up Iowa with the Shadow app, right? The app that Democratic establishment introduced started creating 2 months before the vote, and then it just destroyed everything. It was a complete catastrophe, which I think was intentional. So they were able to give the storyline that Pete Buttigieg won Iowa. Then in New Hampshire, they said, Bernie Sanders is going to win it easily. When he only won by a few percentage points, they could run around the mainstream media and say, wow, that was much closer than we thought it'd be. Interesting. And I just want to give one more. This is not California exit polls, although I've been told by TDMS research that they are working on that. But California, which they... as we talked about last week, there was immense voter suppression. Provisional ballots were just thrown out everywhere like Christmas trees after New Year's, just out on the sidewalk. Hey, we don't fucking care about them.
People waited for hours to try and cast. I'm talking like 6 hours or more to try and vote, and some never got a chance to, or they were given, as you pointed out, Lee, a provisional ballot, which you might as well just give them a fucking Etch-a-Sketch.
Right. And the key to this is, even if that provisional ballot gets counted, if you have millions of provisional ballots or hundreds of thousands, they are counted way later. I mean, they're still counting them right now. So what does that do? That means Bernie Sanders can't run around claiming he won because they're still counting. It also means that he may get less delegates because, the provisionals are thrown out so easily. So anyway, California also rigged in that way. And here are the last things I'll say about exit polls as we're watching this thing be fucking stolen from the progressive candidate yet again, exactly the same as 2016. And many of you have pointed out how infuriating it is that Bernie Sanders doesn't say shit about this. And I agree, absolutely. But in the TDMS articles, they say, according to a recent Gallup World Poll, only 40% of Americans say they are confident in the honesty of U.S. elections. The United States remains one of the few major democracies in the world that continue to allow unaccountable, unverifiable, computerized vote counting, not observable by the public, to determine the results of its elections. We have the worst elections in the Western world. It's a catastrophe, and people should be fucking furious. And I mean, you know, I guess I expected nothing different, but it's amazing to watch them just do it all over again.
I also think, just really quick, one of the things that our friend Ben Norton noted to us yesterday was...
He's with the Gray Zone.
Yeah, he's a great investigative journalist. And one of the things that he said that he and Code Pink and a couple of other folks were coming together to do was to call on Venezuela to send election observers to the United States because for folks who don't know, one of the things that we have whined and bitched about is the fact that Venezuela's elections aren't legitimate. Of course, when they actually have invited, which they do, invited international election observers there from the U.S., from Europe, from Asia, people are like, wow, these are really legit. Like, these are incredibly democratic. And yet, of course, our corporate media and our imperialist war machine government just continue to say, it's fuck it, they're not legitimate. So in kind, Code Pink and
Gray Zone
and some other folks are inviting Venezuela to come observe our elections, and maybe give us some pointers, like, hey, what are we doing wrong? Is it wrong that we give people ballots that don't matter? Is it wrong that we kick people off the voter rolls for being black or Latinx? Like, is it wrong that we close all these polling places and then don't tell anyone about it? Like, is it wrong that we have voter ID laws? Like, all of this shit that restricts the ability to access any semblance of democracy that we waved by, well, we never actually fucking had it. So that's something that's going on right now, which is, I think, some beautiful poetic justice right there.
I mean, these people have to understand there's no reason to trust that when you push that fucking button on the screen, that vote is getting counted. Why should we trust that? After all they've done to us, after all the ways they've rigged it, why should we fucking trust those machines? And I'm not saying don't vote. I still believe that we all have to vote in massive numbers so that they're unprepared to actually steal enough that we can win this thing, but or people can have an influence. And you do have an influence, by the way, a lot on the down ballot races, which are also important, perhaps more important in your city than the top of the ballot. But it's just, people should be so outraged. It doesn't matter who you fucking want to win. I mean, unless you're so cynical that you're like, I like that it's rigged because then there's a greater chance of Biden winning and I like Biden. Like, that's such a shitty human being to be, because that shit comes back to haunt you. Like, that same shit, like defending a system that is completely corrupt and there's no proof you're getting a genuine election. Anyway, people should be outraged. People should be fucking outraged. That's all I'm saying.
And folks, I have mentioned this before, but for folks who are just now listening, if you are outraged, if you're listening to this and you're starting to see red and you're at risk of blowing a blood vessel, head over to burnthednc.org. That's BERN, thednc.org. It's basically a website and a meeting point that some friends and I have put together with regards to the fuckery that's happening right now during the primaries and the caucuses and going into the DNC convention in July. We had our first organizing meeting this past weekend. It went really, really well, and we're super stoked to move forward. So please do jump in on that if you feel, as I do, that this is some fucked up bullshit. Technical term, and we have to do something about it. So again, that's BERN, thednc.org.
It's a nonviolent organization that believes in civil disobedience and does not want you to BURN your neighbor's house down. So, but
Lee is my legal team.
I'm standards and practices. So a couple of quick things before we get on to coronavirus. Before we catch coronavirus. Let's talk
I've been licking faucets all day, so I think I'm on my way.
Two big things came out this week. One was my book, which I've told you about, perhaps too much. Anyway,
Ew.
that's at Lee Camp.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Like, does he have a book? Lee Camp book I just did interviews on Jimmy Dore show about it, which you can check out. I have an interview with Richard Wolf's on Richard Wolf's show about the book as well, which you can check out if you're still deciding whether to buy it, but really you shouldn't be deciding. You should just go get it. LeeCampBook.com.
Impulse buy.
It's it's got an intro by Jimmy Dore and Chris Hedges. Anyway, the other cool thing that came out this week is the trailer for Eleanor's new documentary.
Yeah, so I have a website up and a new trailer for my long-form piece on West Virginia called Hard Road of Hope. If you're on my email list, you will have already gotten an email about this. If you're not on my email list, why?
For what?
For why? But folks can go to hardroadofhope.com to watch the trailer and get a little bit more information. We're still doing post on the actual film, so it's not available to purchase as of yet. But as soon as it's available, we will set up a purchase option on the site. And, for folks who want to access it for screenings or educational purposes, that will be an option as well. But for right now, go take a look at the trailer. I'm very excited. This is me stepping into a new space. Folks might know that I've stopped doing my weekly show with Free Speech TV, and this is now I'm moving into longer form pieces. So this is my first foray into that. So I would love for you guys to come with me and check it out.
The trailer's killer. Check it out. But now I have to say that if you get anything out of this show, if you appreciate this show, go to patreon.com/commoncensored. We have no ads for anything other than our own stuff. We aren't sponsored by anybody except for you. And the podcast has been doing great. We've got, 10,000 views on YouTube alone, which is not the main outlet for this podcast. However, very few people of the thousands and thousands that listen to us actually see the need to sign up. So I'm hoping you're one of those, and I'm hoping you go over to patreon.com/commoncensored. You can sign up for a very small amount of money, and we're going to wait for you to do that actually right now. So we're going to, just get going. And sorry, If you know, you got to click the other, click that one. Okay, that's actually driving me insane. So we're not going to wait any longer. But please go do that. Also, we're coming to perform live. Eleanor is coming to Denver. You can figure
That's my opening song.
Yeah, to perform with Emily Yates, and that is March 17th.
March 19th.
19th.
Good God, it's the 17th anniversary. It's on March 19th.
Holy. And they can go to artkillingapathy.com to find out.
To get tickets. And please, we don't have coronavirus, and Denver is really clean and nice. So, so if you're in the Denver area, please spread the word and come see us.
Also, we're coming to...
It's the 17th anniversary of Shock and Awe, the most recent war in Iraq. So there will be a lot of great, powerful anti-war and necessary anti-imperialist voices and music and spoken word.
Also, we're coming to performing Flagstaff, Tucson, Montreal, Columbus, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Toronto. RedactedTour.com is where you can find out all of that. Asheville, North Carolina, a bunch of places. Eleanor will be opening for some of those shows. And, text the word censored to 33777 to get signed up to our email list. All right, let's move on.
Coronavirus. So we were, as Lee mentioned, we were just up in New York, and... So apparently there's no more Purell left, like in the state of New York. And
I saw people that actually they were in a tube of Purell as they walked around. They just stayed in the tube.
Like Bubble Boy, but with Purell.
Yeah.
And it's not that you shouldn't be flippant, but I think having spoken to a friend of mine who is an emergency room doctor and a medical professional, she said, people want there to be more that they can do than what actually works, which is this shit that we've been telling you for years, which is wash your goddamn hands. Don't touch your face. Just don't do it.
I saw you touching your face today. I did.
That's because I like to live dangerously.
So apparently hand sanitizer over 70% alcohol is good. It is not as good as washing your hands, but it does have an impact.
Because what my friend was explaining to me with how that works is what the hand washing does is it physically washes the germs off of your hands. Purell obviously doesn't do that. So hand washing is incredibly important. It's why, like, when surgeons go into a surgery, they're not pureeing their fucking hands. They're washing and scrubbing and rinsing and all of that good shit. So that is really the what you need to be doing. And yes.
Well, I was going to ask, what are the censored things? Like, what is it? People have probably heard 1 billion coronavirus reports right now, so far. So what are the things that we're not getting on our mainstream media? Is kind of where I want to center this.
Yes, I just wanted to get that out of the way because as a Jewish mother, I need to let people know what to do.
Aw, you're so sweet.
I want people who listen to this to be healthy.
She also baked everybody some kugel. So if you'll just line up out front, we'll get that for you.
Well, so there's a lot of, and I think we mentioned this last week a little bit, but this basically highlights the pitfalls and the failures of our system when something like this happens. The same way that when a tornado happens or a hurricane, it really highlights how our system is rigged against the people who are most marginalized and need support the most.
And this is late stage capitalism. It is capitalism where you've gotten to such an extreme inequality that the oligarchs rule the country completely. They have no risk or threat that they are going to be kicked out or stopped. And they gut all of the services, the social services for the quote-unquote poor compared to them. So the poor to them is, middle class is still poor to them. So they've gutted so much of the system that is meant to be there, the safety net that is meant to be there for when shit goes down. And it's not just supposed to be mass pandemic shit. It's supposed to be individual shit. Like if your life gets fucked up because you go bankrupt because you had medical bills personally, there's supposed to be a safety net there for you. But now we see that not only is it not there for individuals, it's also been gutted for a situation like this, where the CDC doesn't have the manpower, human power that they need. They don't have the money they need. They don't have the government officials that give a shit at the other end of this. Like, Trump is clearly a fucking idiot. For those of you who haven't seen it, there was this amazing moment where he went and met with epidemiologists and kept bragging about how good he was and how much he understood it, and then said some of the dumbest shit you've ever heard. He said people should get 2 flu vaccines.
So he started by going up there, and he has like this smug look on his face, like he's figured it out, and these doctors, these medical professionals don't even know what's coming. So he goes up there and he's like, so I heard that the symptoms are very flu-like. So why don't you just give people the flu vaccine? And then it was clear, he was like, mic drop moment. And then the doctors were like, no, because that's not going to work.
They were like horrified.
Yeah,
like, no.
But then he doubled down. He was like, well, I don't think you understand. So he was like, well, but since it has flu-like symptoms, if you've already gotten a flu vaccine, why don't you get another one? And the doctor's like, no, no, do not do that.
That's not how things work.
Because spoiler alert, the flu vaccine is the flu.
It's a mild version of the flu.
If you keep putting that shit in your body, you just keep pumping yourself full of the flu.
Yeah, and obviously coronavirus is a completely different thing than the flu.
Right.
So getting a flu vaccine does nothing to stop the coronavirus. And so when he was the one I actually saw the video of, was when he goes to the doctor. So you don't think that getting a flu vaccine would at least help a little?
Mm-hmm.
Would at least help a little? And the doctor just goes, like, it looked like his brain was going to explode. He's just like, no.
Yeah, it's like well, syphilis oftentimes towards the end gives you symptoms that look a lot like leprosy, but that doesn't mean that it's leprosy. Like shit can manifest in your bodies similarly, but that doesn't mean that the same medicine is gonna fucking help.
Or it's like, well, we saw, if you're trying to get to the moon, and someone was like, well, what if you jump really hard? And they were like, and the astronaut, NASA's like, no. And then he's like, well, you guys are just kind of going up in a rocket, which is, harder than us jumping, but you don't think jumping a little would help? No.
But there are other, you mentioned censored stories. Actually, both of these are from Alan McLeod on Mint Press News, and one of them is that the Bank Policy Institute, BPI, a Washington-based lobbying organization which represents many of the nation's biggest banks, released a set of proposals this past week.
I'm sure.
Which
Wonderful.
the most important of which recommends that the Federal Reserve lower capital requirements to zero, which means basically that banks can lend an unlimited amount without having any assets or wealth to back it up.
Can you imagine? They already have fractional reserve lending, which is like they can lend way more or gamble way more than they have in reserve. Right. It's already terrible.
And now they want to drop that to absolute zero. Beyond that, the BPI also suggested relaxing the so-called stress tests that force banks to show that they can withstand economic shocks, which is what's happening right now.
Which is like you kind of need it now more than ever.
Right. And this, the BPI claims, would help America fight the coronavirus, which that's not true because you don't need big banks to be deregulated in order to fight a virus. You actually need them to be regulated,
you know this?
So that people aren't getting further fucked over financially while they're also trying to fight a fucking epidemic.
This fits perfectly with the shock doctrine. It is. They want these things. The banks want these things. Wall Street wants these things. They didn't care what the shock was that hit our society. It could have been earthquakes. It could have been coronavirus. It could have been fires or lava. It could have been pterodactyls suddenly came back and were just eating people off the streets, and they were like, you know what I think would help is if we just had no more regulation. I think that would help stop the pterodactyls. And you're like, no, it won't. That's just a thing you want. You're just saying things you want.
Right. What you actually need, you need to invest in the shit that actually does address public health. Like, I don't know, maybe you stop stealing money from the CDC and giving it to the fucking military. So instead of putting money into killing people, you put money into researching what kills people.
Yeah.
And beyond that, of course, universal health care. Or hey, how about putting money into communities. So, for instance, this latest, also again from Mint Press News and Alan McLeod, coronavirus in New York City has said that they will not close their schools because the homeless kids have nowhere else to go.
Which, how fucked up is that?
So they're going to keep schools open.
Don't you think the homeless kids should have had housing to begin with?
Well, but not only that, you're basically saying, well, we should close the schools because it's a public health emergency. But since homeless kids have nowhere else to go, I guess we'll invite them into this petri dish of a global epidemic. Sure, that sounds good. That sounds way better than actually
It's
investing in community centers, investing in housing as a human right. That's way better, right? Just
it's
inviting kids into the fucking eye of the storm.
Oh, we've gutted the entirety of our social safety net. I guess we'll just let these kids keep sleeping on top of each other because what else are we going to do at this point? I mean, this is such a... it's like you needed this shock to the system for people to realize how fucked things have gotten. Like, that fact that they're keeping over the schools for homeless kids is like, it's just another point where you're like, wow, this is fucked. Mm-hmm. And also connected to the coronavirus, as many of you know, the stock markets have been crashing, so much so that the Dow today actually cut off trading for a bit because they were worried that it was a run on the stocks. And to me, one of the most important points that you're seeing from this is that our stock market, our economic system, they call it the heartbeat of our economic system, Wall Street, and it only measures consumption. It just measures what we're buying and creating. That is what GDP is, right? Gross domestic product, what you create and what you consume, and that is it. I mean, it basically just... it celebrates that we're ravaging the planet and meanwhile shitting out in the form of pollution, just shitting all over the world. And that's a plus. That's a positive. Stocks are doing well when that's happening. So the fact that people are now not going out as much, not buying plane tickets as much, not traveling, not doing all these things, the stock market goes down. It should be our economic system should measure something else. It should measure health and happiness. That's what GDP should measure. Instead, it only measured happiness if you're only getting your happiness from new shoes, new car, and new tits.
Right.
Like if you're buying things and just shitting them out endlessly, throwing out the old shoes every 2 minutes, that's good for our stock market, good for GDP. But the moment people stop doing that, And they could be living perfectly happy lives. You can decide, I'm not going to buy anything and I just want to spend time with my family. That's great for you. Maybe that makes you really happy. That does nothing for our stock market because it's just, our economic system is just built on, I don't know why I can't talk, ravaging the world. It really is.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is what happens when a disaster hits. Like you mentioned, the shock doctrine, Lee, which is, if you haven't read it, it's in a phenomenal book by Naomi Klein. It's also just like the concept, which is when something like this hits, banks and private corporations swoop in to see how they can make a buck off of it. That's like, whether that be price gouging, face masks or Purell or whatever the fuck, or water, after a hurricane. Or like these big banks being like, well, if you want this to not be bad, you're going to have to bend over and take it harder. So but this is what happens when disasters like this happen. When disasters like this hit, you really see how incredibly ill-suited and fragile our system is. It is not built to withstand any kind of tremor or rattling because it is built on such flimsy foundations. It is built on the faith that we have in the Ponzi scheme that is Wall Street. It is built on nothing but broken promises and lies and digital ones and zeros that tell us to believe in the almighty dollar, but that has never and will never protect us. And so it's moments like these where we really see that capitalism cannot, has not, will never save us from the ravages of climate change, from the ravages of epidemics, and anything else that will be thrown in our direction.
And I'll have more on this on this week's episode of Redacted tonight on how the coronavirus is revealing what our capitalist system really stands for. A couple other quick notes is that mostly those who have died from coronavirus, the large percentage are older people, so stay away from them. And if you are an older person, stay away from yourself.
We are not an ageist podcast.
However, corona is ageist. Coronavirus. Also, if you're on a cruise ship, don't do that.
Oh God!
Just don't be there. Don't be there. If you're listening to this on a cruise ship, jump into the water. Kidding.
Yeah, you better be careful, Lee. Now that people have started to take you seriously, like that guy at the bookstore, you gotta be careful what you suggest.
You put this other note in here. Do you want to talk about this? The unintended side effect of coronavirus?
Yeah, so there is, well, it sounds kind of dark to say that this is a silver lining, but it also, again, speaks to...
A silver corona, if you will, around the outside of the...
So again, it speaks to how our system is structured, and when we humans are incapable of doing what our system demands of us, things get better for everything else. So basically, since the beginning of this epidemic in China, China has cut its carbon emissions by 100 million metric tons.
It's incredible.
So yeah, like super shitty that it takes a global epidemic for us to stop killing the planet, even just momentarily.
Yeah.
But that is, I mean, and they have pictures.
I mean, you're right that this is a silver lining that globally, not just China, but globally, as many people lose their jobs, as many people stop working or going to work because of this pandemic, as many people stop buying things because they don't want to be out buying things. Very good for the environment. Environment is loving it.
Yeah. So again, like, I think this is, Lee, you kind of hinted at this, but this is one of those moments where we can have a very clear and spotlit moment to reflect on how fucked up our system is,
right,
and really see that there's no sustainable way to move forward inside of the confines of this capitalist system, and we have to move beyond that, not just in order to survive epidemics like this with regards to access to healthcare and basic human rights like that, but to have a livable future.
And moving on to another story, if you're ready. Are you ready?
I am. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for checking.
Good. I wanted to check in. There. You're like, no, Corona forever. I want to squeeze in this story. because as everyone listening to this already knows, we've been quote unquote at war in Afghanistan for roughly ever, I think. Hold on, let me check the calendar. Yeah, ever.
Yeah.
We actually just hit ever 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Been at war in Afghanistan for whatever it is, 18 years or something. It's crazy. There are literally kids fighting in Afghanistan who weren't alive when the war started. Like, that's how repulsive it is. But what's new is this so-called peace deal that America hammered out, right? If you read some of the propaganda press, what Trump's saying, et cetera, America hammered out this peace deal with the Taliban and the Afghanistan government, and finally there's going to be peace in Afghanistan, and the U.S. troops are going to be withdrawn. Finally, we will see them come home, and there's no more U.S. in Afghanistan. It's horseshit. It's basically all horseshit. Basically, Trump had a promise that he would end the war in Afghanistan, and so he's trying to make it look like he's succeeding at that promise because Trump thinks he doesn't actually care whether things get done. He just wants his voters to think things got done. So this deal, though, first of all, it's not supposed to be a full U.S. withdrawal for 14 months. Over a year from now, when Trump could very well not be in office.
Safely after the 2020 election.
Right. So basically, he wants to run around during the election to say he ended the war in Afghanistan, and it's not actually, even if it were going to happen, supposed to happen for 14 months. Number two is that the Taliban only agreed to it because they were told by some sort of American mediator or someone connected to the American government that the Afghanistan government would release 5,000 Taliban prisoners. The Afghan government then said, no, we're not. We're not releasing 5,000 Taliban prisoners who we consider terrorists. So the Taliban basically only agreed to this because they thought they were getting their prisoners released, and they're not. So they don't, for all intents and purposes, who knows whether they even think there's any deal at all now that they've found out they're not getting these 5,000 prisoners. So the Taliban now has continued their attacks. There's been dozens of attacks around Afghanistan. And another point, this was the exact same deal that apparently America turned down like months ago. They got nothing new for it. They just agreed to it so that Trump could look like he ended the war in Afghanistan, which he did not.
Well, and another couple of points.
Sorry, occupation of Afghanistan.
Another couple of points. It does nothing to end the bloodshed either by troops or the quote unquote shadow economy that is bolstered by the illegal drug trade and illegal mining. And folks might not know this, but something like, I think it's like 96% of the world's opium comes from.
I think it's down to the 80s, but it is a massive percentage.
It's still a stupid amount come from Afghanistan's poppy fields. And there are pictures.
And a large percentage of that is used by America.
Well, yeah, and
opioids.
you can see pictures of U.S. troops standing in poppy fields, basically protecting them, making sure that the poppy trade, that the poppy fields remain in maintain their crop and have been incredibly brutal towards farmers who would like to not grow poppies or don't want to be part of this quote unquote shadow economy. So that's another side of it. The other part of the deal that is really not being talked about is that the CIA has said nothing about their what is it called?
Black sites and stuff like that.
Their projects,
right.
Their operations ceasing as part of this deal. So even if, which is, as you notedly is not going to happen, even if the troops, the official U.S. troops are withdrawn from Afghanistan, the CIA whose presence has grown exponentially under Obama and now Trump, they're just like, well, I mean, we're going to stay because we're not part of the peace deal.
Well,
so, yeah.
And what this comes down to is there's no real incentive for the American empire to let Afghanistan flourish into a strong country. The U.S. empire wants Afghanistan weak. They want to keep exploiting resources, whether it's the minerals, the metals, the poppies, as you said, or the opioids. And they can get oil pipelines through Afghanistan, even if Afghanistan, doesn't have that much oil within it. I'm not really sure what that is, but I think far more likely we wanted the oil out of Iraq than whatever Afghanistan has. But they have massive other types of minerals and materials. So it's just like allowing a strong Afghanistan to flourish and become a formidable foe to our interests in the Middle East is not something the U.S. has any interest in. So even if we claim we're going to leave there, we're fucking not. We'd probably go back in if they started to become a strong country.
Well, I mean, we're not only are we not leaving, we're basically we're shifting so that we can have a bigger, stronger hold. Stranglehold. One of the things that corporate media has been chattering about is that Afghanistan's now open for business. So again, we circle back to the main bottom line here, which is the bottom line. And one of the reasons that some alternative media are pointing to the why this deal was even agreed upon was because they saw opportunities, whether that be the war oligarchs, so-called, in Afghanistan, or that be, the U.S. oligarchs see opportunities there and they want to access those opportunities, but it's still, it's still like a little sticky. So if we could sign some bullshit peace deal to make investment a little bit more sexy in Afghanistan, then hey, the military industrial complex still gets a shit ton of cash, but then a bunch of other complexes get a bunch of cash. So hey, cool.
Yeah, it's so I'll categorize that under super fucked.
Yeah. Agreed.
So we're going to wrap up there and head over to patreon.com/commoncensored. If you feel you got $1 or $2 out of this episode, please go over there and become a member. Patreon.com. So that's patreon.com/commoncensored. And join us over there. We're going to do an extra 10 to 15 minutes. And you make this show possible. Also, please check out Eleanor's new trailer at hardroadofhope.com. All right, everybody. For this week,
act out.
Keep fighting.